Oh, hello there, Glue Nation. It's your boy, Brian, of the Glue Guys. Crazy day. Mike and I recorded a whole hour-long show, and then at the very friggin' end, this LaMarcus Aldridge, very sad LaMarcus Aldridge news broke. We didn't get a real chance to cover it on the show, and then Mike, for the podcast, wanted to get something out, so he recorded his own sort of 10-minute interlude. I don't know. I actually haven't heard it yet, so we'll see if it could be intro, could be interlude. Don't hold me to that. I don't know which one. But yeah, so basically what I figured was I would just play Mike's thing because I didn't want to have two different experiences, and honestly, Mike's better at long-form individual talking than I am, as you can tell. So here's what I was going to do. I figured I would just, turn on his audio from the first part of the podcast. I'll run some LaMarcus Aldridge highlight clips, some B-roll, and we'll all listen to it together. I don't know. Maybe this works, maybe it doesn't. Maybe this is, maybe this hits the cutting room floor, but I figured, in an effort to keep it a little bit together, that this would be the best version of it. And also, Mike probably has the right thing to say about this, and I probably don't. So, without further ado, I'll play that, put up the B-roll, we'll all sit together, and, drink some tea. Okay, here I go.
Welcome back to the Glue Guys. Welcome back to the Glue Guys. Welcome back to the Glue Guys. This is Mike here. Brian is not with me for this portion of the show because we recorded an hour-long pod, and as per the tradition of this show, whenever there's breaking news, it always happens the very last second of the pod. So if you were to jump to all the way, I don't know, maybe it was like the 50th minute, the very last minute of the pod, you would hear me reading a tweet about LaMarcus Aldridge retiring, and I would say to Brian, hey, I have to go, so let's do something at the beginning that we can top the podcast with. But now Brian's busy in work, so it's just me. But, obviously, this is sad. Glad that all this stuff was caught, but if you read the reason why LaMarcus Aldridge is retiring, it's because he was having issues with his heartbeat. I guess over his whole career that he always had sort of heart concerns and health concerns regarding his heart. Just real quick to kind of pull back on LaMarcus Aldridge, besides, like what he gave the Nets and all that stuff, I think he gave up something like $7 million to be able to join the Nets to be a part of what the team hopes is a championship run. And he's made a bunch of money over his career, and as people who don't make $35 million a year, we could be like, oh, $7 million is not that much. But that's a commitment. People don't like to just give away millions of dollars to then go to a place to play less minutes and to have to fit into a role that they've never had to fit into in their career. And LaMarcus Aldridge did that for 5 games, I think, for the Nets, and he was productive and good in those 5 games for the Nets. He offered something that was a little bit different. But he is retiring. So what that does lead to is it kind of reorganizes the team a little bit in a different way. Kind of obviously puts them back to where they were before they even got LaMarcus Aldridge. So what you're looking at going forward is the Nets do have an open roster spot, which they could fill. We could talk about whether they should fill it with Chiozza or Aldridge. But the number one thing the team lacks now without having Aldridge is that you could get the ball in LaMarcus Aldridge's hands and he would score for you on the offensive end of the floor. And yet he also was able to dish out assists. And then defensively, he wasn't the best defender at this point in his career, but he certainly was an incredibly smart defender and a guy who was a big body and someone who could compete on that end of the floor when the teams that the Nets were maybe viewing to the future were the 76ers or the Bucks or the Lakers, right? So he was a piece that the team wanted to have. And Nash immediately was giving him pretty big minutes to fit. He had a role on this team and a pretty big role. And he wouldn't have come to the Nets if he didn't have that role. And the flip side of that, the Nets wanted him in that role, it seemed. So what the Nets' big man rotation is, and we're going to talk so much more about this in our next pod, and we're going to kind of see how everything shakes out. It's interesting that this is happening, obviously, that DeAndre Jordan has his best game of the year against the 76ers in a loss, but has his best game of the year. And he's going to be back getting more minutes. I think we're going to see more Claxton, more Jeff Green at the 5, and probably more Blake at the 5 too. So ultimately, there is a lot of flexibility that the Nets still have from a center position, but I think Aldridge was firmly in the team's plans, not just in the regular season, but in the playoffs. And Nash has been extremely skilled at navigating when he plays guys, how many minutes he gives guys, kind of bringing people along, and then maybe, shedding minutes for other people, but then bringing them back. It was sort of a wavy pattern that he would have with his minutes distribution. And Aldridge being done for the year, retiring, is a curveball, but his inclusion to the roster was a curveball to begin with. Most people didn't think it would happen anyways. So the thing looking forward is what do the Nets do with that spot? Chris Chiozza is done for the year. LaMarcus Aldridge has retired. Spencer Dinwiddie maybe could actually come back, but he wouldn't come back into the playoffs. So do they go and try to find another big to put onto the roster? My feeling is that they probably don't need another big that is just another big. Meaning, this team doesn't need a center just to have another guy that isn't going to contribute. Because ultimately, when you get to the playoffs, I think DeAndre is going to be playing a good amount of playoff minutes because he's a veteran. You're going to see a lot of Jeff Green, and a lot of Blake, and a lot of KD at the 5 in points in the game. And Claxton, they love Claxton. Steve Nash loves to deploy Claxton as a defender. So I don't see the value in just getting like replacement level big just to have someone that could maybe play 5 minutes a game. I think there's more value in finding sort of the Alize Johnson approach. So Alize Johnson signed a 3-year extension, and there was reports that he could have gotten more money other places, but he wanted to stay with the Nets and be a part of this team. I would like to see the Nets think about identifying the Alize Johnson type, but a guard. Obviously this team won't ever really need ball handling into the future. But I think there's probably more of an opportunity to find someone that can help the team in games where like Harden's going to rest his injuries during the regular season. Kyrie's going to need games off, to find another young guard that can fit in here. And maybe he's a guy that, like Alize Johnson, sticks onto the roster for multiple seasons. Whereas center, I just don't see the center being a thing. Well, anyway, so we had recorded, as I said, a whole podcast that we talked a lot about the 76ers game.
Yes. So good stuff, Mike. Echoes my thoughts exactly. Yeah. So anyways, that's what I wanted to do. And coming up after this is we do, some first round playoff matchup thoughts. But yeah, all very sad news. Good to hear though, that LaMarcus is, prioritizing the big stuff. So, anyways, yeah, we'll just kick it back to the other portion of the podcast now. Thanks for dealing with us while we navigate these waters. But okay, cool. Thanks. See you there.
So we are so close. We are so close to the NBA playoffs.
How close are we? We're pretty close.
So close. Yeah. I don't fully know, but we're so close. Let me pull up the NBA standings because that will probably help do this whole bit. But we've talked about this before. We've kind of ranked the 7 through 10 seeds and what would be good for the Nets, what would be bad for the Nets. What I wanted to do was to do a mini sort of playoff preview where we look at what the Nets, all the teams that the Nets could possibly face in the playoffs from round 1 to the Eastern Conference Finals. We're not going to go to the finals matchups quite yet. And just do pros, cons. Heartening v. disheartening is the way I described it before.
Sure.
Buoyed be unbuoyed.
Yeah.
Right? So, and I think that it's instructive to know who you're afraid of and who you're not afraid of. Scary v. not scary.
Yeah. Can I start with just a small diatribe about how I was looking at this, and I think it's incredibly important that we actually get, because we kind of forfeited the the first seed overall last night. We're just like, yeah, forget about that. We should probably not do that. We should probably get that first seed. Just based on how this thing is lining up, you could get a pretty nasty playoff run if you're not careful. And the difference between the first and the second seed is night and day.
Why do you say that?
Well, we can get into it, but I will say like the first seed for me. I mean, you want to avoid that 2-3 matchup in the second round. That's the one.
It's not necessarily the first round, though. The Miami Heat are currently the 7th seed and the Knicks are the 6th seed. I mean, like that's all going to change.
So there's that. I think if it's Hornets Pacers, and we can just get into this right now. But so it looks like Hornets or Pacers. My bet, the safe money's on them to make this the 8th seed, one way or the other. I think that the Heat or the Knicks will probably stay where they are, or maybe improve slightly and be jostling for 6, 5, 4, whatever. But I would say if I'm a betting man, and I'm not. I'm not that way. But if I was, I would put it on Pacers/Hornets to be that 8th seed. Who that feels like a pretty easy first round to me. Either of those two teams.
Yeah, I mean, I there's a little. I think there's like a little fear with the Pacers just because LeVert had been out.
It's a real
He's
team.
back.
Yeah, for sure.
That starting five, when all together, is a talented team. But there's not much behind it. But yeah, but like the Nets shouldn't be worried about really any team they face in the first round. I think what you said is key, right? It's that second round matchup. It's like, do you get the Bucks in the second round, or do you get like the Hawks or the Celtics,
right,
or some other
breezy?
One of those?
That's breezy stuff right there.
Yeah. Okay. So let's do it this way. So I have pros and cons for each of these teams, starting down from the Wizards. And we're not going to spend that much time on the Wizards.
Yeah. Of course you do, Mike. Of course you do.
Well, and to explain the playoff someone had tweeted me that I misexplained how like the 7 versus 10, 8 versus 9 thing is going to happen, the play-in tournament.
Mm-hmm.
I will admit, I still don't fully know.
So you're not, I was about to say, are you about to dispute that person? It sounds like you're not. It sounds like you think that they're right.
I'm just going to trust that I'm going to trust them that I was wrong.
Yeah, good.
But I think what we can do is that, so the Wizards are only a game up from the Cleveland Cavaliers, but I don't think the Cavs are really trying to make the playoffs. I mean, they gave away Andre Drummond and, JaVale McGee. I think the Wizards are trying to make the playoffs. They would like to do that, even though they are a really bad team. So I'll just go quick on the Wizards.
Yeah.
We shouldn't spend that much time on it.
Please.
Terrible defensively. It's a pro. They match the Nets at times. The negative, and the Wizards have beaten the Nets this year, is that they do have Beal and Westbrook. And you could get into a playoff situation where those guys are scoring 60 points a night. Davis Bertans is raining fire from 3. The Wizards are one of the few teams that could consistently, at least in the early round, throw in points against the Nets. It just make it so like as bad as the Wizards are defensively, it almost doesn't matter because the Nets can only be so efficient. Mm-hmm. And because the Wizards are good offensively, it could make it a little challenging, but let's be real. We're not that worried about that.
Let's.
Toronto Raptors. Let me start with this way.
Mm-hmm.
Would you be worried at all if it was the Toronto Raptors in the first round that the Nets were seeing?
I mean, like, on a spectrum, more than a Hornets first round, but grand scheme of things, probably not that worried.
Right.
Yeah.
I think the only thing that's scary is just because they won that championship 2 years ago.
It's a championship.
That residue.
Yes, it's got some managerial chops. The coaching staff knows what they're doing. It's spooky for those types of not really spooky reasons.
Yeah, well, and they do kind of have a roster that would be a pest for the Nets, in meaning that so they don't have the big man center, so the Nets could play their best lineups at all times. Like the Nets wouldn't have to worry about having a big beefy boy down low to defend against the Bucks big people or Joel Embiid, or even if they played the Bulls and it's Vucevic. But the Raptors do have a flexible, wingy, switchy defensive lineup. Lowry, I'm a little worried about Lowry on one of the Kyrie or Harden. Like he could step on a foot and try to break an ankle. He's that kind of guy.
Yeah, he is that kind of guy.
So I'm not really worried about a loss. I'm worried about the Raptors assaulting
pulling a
Nets.
Kelly Olynyk. That name, I can't say. It's like rural juror, Kelly Olynyk. I'm trying to like what
Rural jurors.
yeah, or the rural juror.
You throw around rural jurors a lot.
It's like Kelly Olynyk, that friggin' guy who's a psychopath tearing out people's shoulders and stuff. Like, luckily, we're not gonna have to deal with that, but anymore. But anyways, yeah, you're right. Kyle Lowry is one of those homicidal maniacs. Yeah.
So I'm gonna Chicago Bulls. It's pretty quick. They just have two really good players who neither of whom have done really anything in the playoffs, and so I'm not ultimately that worried about Chicago.
They're not going to figure it out by then. Though they're on the up and up. You like to see it.
So and Vucevic would score 30, a game in the playoffs, and Levine who's going to score 25, but I think the rest of the team is pretty bad. Like, it's just not a good squad around them.
Whatever happened to Lauri Markkanen? He didn't pan out, huh?
I think he's a restricted free agent.
His numbers always kind of look decent, but I guess nobody cares about him.
No. Indiana Pacers, we kind of talked about them.
Yeah.
I think they're like a type of team that they're not going to the Nets are so good if they're all healthy that there's nothing to worry about per se. I would say the pro in terms of the Nets perspective is that the Pacers haven't had like the full lineup all year. They've been disjointed all year. So they haven't been, and they have a new coach. So it's not like they have the institutional knowledge that has existed all these past few seasons that then once everything clicks into place, they'll be great. I think there's still some figuring out. But the con from a Nets perspective is that they do have that starting five of Brogdon, LeVert, TJ Warren, Miles Turner, and Sabonis. That's a tough, big, athletic, smart squad.
Yeah.
That like is an unusually talented 8th seed, if that's what they are, or 9th seed, or whatever they become. That's a tough team.
Of the cons, the biggest con against playing any team is like, do they have a guy who bangs down low, which seems to be like, if we're designing our Death Star here, that's the miscellaneous at the bottom of the Death Star that gets put in there.
I don't know if I can be on board with this being a bit every week.
I'm gonna bring it back, but I do think that the banging down low phenomenon is the one that based on what I've seen, the one that I'm only really worried about. And Sabonis is that way, and so they've got one. It's not like his primary mode of attack, but it's definitely a weapon. So I don't know. Heck.
Charlotte Hornets, that's who you want to play in the first round, right?
You really do.
All of these teams in that 7 to 15
a Devonte Graham led Charlotte Hornets is definitely who you want to be playing, and feasting on a Zeller of whichever Zeller. Throw any Zeller in there. That's
put them all out there.
Yeah, and so that's the team that I would most like. I would want to play that team. Yeah.
I would rather play the Hornets over the Pacers, the Bulls, the Raptors, almost even more so than the Wizards. And I think Borega's a good coach. They had been playing well. Gordon Hayward is a real player, like he's a real basketball player now.
Sure.
They have talent. Bridges is one of the greatest dunkers, in-game dunkers we have today, which doesn't really matter for the playoffs. Obviously, LaMelo's injury is. Like, if they had LaMelo, there would be no part of me that'd be like, oh, maybe they'll shock the Nets. But obviously he'd make them better. Without LaMelo, it becomes like, that's the matchup you want. You want what Nets fans would want is the Nets to get the first seed, the Hornets to be the 8 that beats the 9 so that they become the first round matchup. Just a nice, perfect landing spot.
That's right.
Because around it, the Heat are at 7. The Pacers are at 9. The Bulls, if the Bulls are in the playoffs, even if it's not that good of a squad, that crowd is going to be into it. That crowd is going to be excited for the Bulls, and there's going to be fans in the stands for a lot of these playoff games.
And the other thing too is, our 3 best players have only played 7 games together, something like that, something incredibly low.
It's galling.
It's galling. I'm not buoyed by it or heartened at all. And so, anyways, I think that. We're going to need that first round to, warm that squad up. I don't want it to be anyone of the try hard ilk, and I put Miami and the Knicks as like extra super try hard teams, because I do think that a try hard team could give us some weird problems just while we're trying to like actually gel those three together for the second time in the season.
We have Miami. This is a tough one. Are we giving Miami too much credit? Or is there too much fear for Miami?
I think there's a requisite amount of like they should have been better than they are, right? They went to the finals last year. They're hard to place, and so I think there's like a rightful amount of like, what exactly are you? Like, what are you trying to pull, Miami? That I just look at askance at them, and I was like, what kind of Pat Riley ass shit is going on over here that I don't know about? Why aren't you guys in at least a 4 seed spot? I mean, they're not far from it, but still, they should have been better all year, and they haven't been. And people have, I don't know, what are people theorizing about why they haven't been better?
I don't know. I think it would be an injury thing. Like they've had some. I think Bam has been hurt at times this year. I think that's the fact.
But they started out incredibly slow. Just like I don't know.
They were bad. They were like a bad team. I mean, like their point differential, if we want to dig into that, is negative 1.3. Which they're an above 500 team record wise, but that would mean you should be below 500 with that point differential. That's about what the Bulls are, and the Bulls' win total is 22 and 32, and that's probably like the difference between like Jimmy Butler and the Miami Heat knowing how to finish games that are close versus the Bulls who don't have any history of doing so. That's why there's that big of a gap between win total and record, and then the point differential, but. So my feeling is I would not want the Nets to play the Heat in the first round of the playoffs. Like if the Nets are the 2 seed and they play the Heat as the 7 seed for round 1, and then they have to go through the Bucks as the 3 seed, and then the 76ers as the 1, and then the Lakers. That is a gauntlet.
It's a gauntlet, right? Real big time.
But in a vacuum, if I'm not thinking about the long-term ramifications of all of this, the Heat haven't been that good. I didn't think they were that good last year. Tyler Hero hasn't been nearly as good this season as he was in the bubble.
Yeah. The matchup.
Duncan Robinson's been good and then bad and then good and then bad.
Right. The matchup doesn't scare me on paper. That's sort of like there's nothing about the team, the composition of the team that says like, oh, that's a team that's built in a way that would cause me to fear that they would sneak up and win a series. There's nothing there for that.
Well, and we can even pull this into the next team on the list that's number 6 in the standings, which is the New York Knicks. But and I kind of this is a broader point. Mm-hmm. The classic thing, if you're a coach who has less talent than the Nets, is slow them down, right? Mm-hmm. Slow the Nets down, slow the game down, make it drain the clock when you have the ball as much as you can in the NBA. It's a 24-second clock, so it's not like college basketball back in the day when you can like really like just like muck up a game, but you could still slow the game down. There's things that you can do. You could do a hack a DJ scenario if he's ever on the floor. Any bad foul shooter, whenever they're on the floor, you maybe hack them just to kind of disrupt offensive rhythm. But are the Nets unslowable?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I just was recently reading about the half-court offense efficiency being, top of the league. It's just like I feel like what we have, especially with the depth of our team, is just the sort of the best kind of adaptive offense that you can possibly have. I mean, if you wanted to get spicy with like people, rim runners and stuff like that, like we have the young guys who can fly, like the way that we got back in the game last night with the Sixers was just by loading up with speedy, streaky boys. So we have a lot of different looks. So like I don't know that if your defense isn't just like an actual like stay at home really solid defense and you're just trying to like throw cheese looks at us, I don't think you're gonna like what you see.
Yeah, and like the Nets aren't. And when I say slow the Nets down, even it's like the Nets aren't like a fast paced team. They're not like this team that is like the Wizards just go. And that's all they got. Like they've got pace, and they try to attack, and that's all they do. And the Nets aren't like that. They do have a team that, I mean, Durant is the greatest half-court offensive weapon in the NBA. Harden is number 2 or number 1, depends. Like over, and Kyrie himself is just again, he's the guy who can get a bucket against anyone at any point. So I think that's why I would lean towards like they are unslowdownable. They are, the only thing you can do against the Nets is to play good enough defense and then play really well on offense to exploit the defensive weakness that the Nets have, and they do have it. But I don't know. I think I give too much credit to the Miami Heat, and I should be less worried. The team that would be worrisome from an anxiety point of view would be the New York Knicks. For me.
I'm inclined to agree, and I think though that like they have two similar things. So I'm going to compare like Bam Adebayo and Julius Randle here. I don't know if you're ready for that comparison.
Ready. I'm here for it.
I think that those two guys, again, like I'm just doing my one dimensional. Do they have guys who bang? And like in this case, I think that the DeAndre Jordan / LaMarcus Aldridge defensive lineup against those bigs are decent fits, at least for our guys. I don't think Bam, like what really is our weakness there is when we're either beat on size or athleticism. Like in terms of skill, which I think is what Bam and Julius increasingly now is trying to beat their defenders with, is like we can outskill the person. That's where I feel most comfortable with DeAndre Jordan, leading holding down a defense against guys like that. When it's someone who's bigger or faster, that scares me more. Although, or we're just like way rangier. I don't know. Although Julius Randle's gotten pretty rangy. Maybe I'm scared. I don't know. I'm talking myself back into it.
Yeah, I think if it was an unlocated team, a team that was just floating amongst the stars and wasn't based in Manhattan, the Knicks would be the team that I would want the Nets to play. They're the best defensive. So? They are the best defensive team in the playoffs. I think the Knicks, it's them or the 76ers. I think the 76ers have a way higher ceiling defensively, but the Knicks consistently play better defense so far. But you just get into a situation if you're the Knicks, we're scoring over a 7-game series against the Nets. Like the Knicks are for sure a team that's going to take a game or two no matter what in the series. They're just going to be able to do it. But to be able to score enough to win 4 games against a team that no matter what will have Harden, Kyrie, and Durant, that's a tough bucket to tow.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, like, I think on paper, why I think the Knicks are one of the teams that I would least like to face in the first round, just even if they were in an island somewhere far, far away and not right next door, is because they are elite at something. There's like an identity to that team where I can't really place, as Miami right now. They used to have an identity that seems a little bit up in the air, and the Hornets are totally lost, and so on and so forth. But the Knicks are like an elite defensive team, and I think that's as good a specialization as anything to try to go into a playoff series with. And not to say that like that means that I would bet against the Nets in any of those situations, but it is one of those things like it's another try hard series. Those guys there's a lot of riffraff. Julius Randle's, who knows what he'll do, freak out and throw a chair at you. And all of a sudden, you're in a dogfight with a team, and that weird things can happen. So I guess in terms of try hardness, that feels like the try hardiest team, especially because their identity is so built around being defensive minded.
There is an interesting scenario that we're really focusing on a Nets perspective.
Yeah, as always.
But right now the first round matchup would be Bucks Knicks, and to me, that is interesting because the way the Bucks have always played, the biggest criticism of Budenholzer is that they just don't change how they play when they're in a series. They believe the system that they have, defensively and offensively, is going to carry them through. And I like the idea of Tibbs and the Knicks going against the Bucks. Now, like, if it flips in the standings and it's Knicks go down to 7 and the Heat go up to 6, which it just was, like, I think yesterday, the Bucks Heat, that would be another good series that there's potential there. But there's like a shot the Knicks could really match up well against the Bucks.
Yeah.
And we could see the upset.
You think think that's where the upset is? That's a good call. I kind of like it because also, the Bucks being upset, that's a meme. There's a thing there.
That would be an interesting way. And then it becomes the Knicks go on to the second round. And if the Nets are the second seed, they would play
Oh,
the Knicks
God.
would play the
How
Nets.
annoying would it? You just never hear the end of it if the Knicks beat the Bucks to get to the second round. Oh my God. Oh my Lord. I really can't root for that.
Boston Celtics. So the Celtics are the 5 seed right now. They're a half game above the Knicks and a full game above the Heat. So there's a lot of jostling that could be had within the standings. So the Celtics could go all the way up to the 4th seed, or they could go all the way down. I mean, technically they could be the 8th seed if they hit a rough patch of ice, as you often hit in Boston. Sorry.
Nice.
It's obvious with the Celtics. It's like they have Jalen and Jason, and that's great. And Kemba, if he, whatever he becomes, he is, like, he could be good. I don't know. We've talked about this before. I've said I've always been worried about the Celtics just because they do have those 2 players, and they do have like 2 true scorers that can put up against the Nets in the way that like Westbrook and Beal can, but even more so because they're wing players. What's your temperature on the Celtics? I mean, they've won 4 games in a row. The Knicks and Celtics have both won 4 games in a row of recent, and they're a descending team at this point.
Yeah, it's weird to kind of I think of like grouping these teams, and I've kind of just in my mind grouped the Celtics and Hawks into like another category of like teams. Yeah, the teams are like similar insofar as they're like team oriented memes. This sort of is where my meme goes. And for those 2 types of teams, I don't see that as a good matchup for what the Nets bring. I actually think that, like, weirdly, for whatever reason, like, well, not for whatever reason. Again, I'm just like laying pretty heavily on this one sort of data point, which is to say that like it is true that we don't deal well with size. Like, we just haven't dealt well with like, larger, more physical teams. We have all of our best players are at the wing, and Kevin Durant, who is tall, is also very lithe and not, sort of shouldn't be responsible for anything approximating or close to the word banging or anything like that. No banging. We're not banging out here. So those 2 teams for me feel like good matchups for the Nets, even though they're higher seeds, just because they so don't do any of the kind of like weakness things that sort of stick out to me as like, oh, that might be a concern here or there. So yeah, although they're very different teams and they're well coached, like the Celtics are obviously, been around and have had a lot of success with that roster in the playoffs and are formidable. Make no doubt. I just don't see them as like a team that's built to give us a real headache at any point, I guess.
Yeah, it's an interesting. So like the only way the Celtics become, I mean, again, there's a lot of movement that can go in the standings. And I think if the Celtics suddenly became the 7th seed, that means that they would start losing some games, which would be good for the Nets. It's like that's kind of the psychological impact of moving down in the standings and they become the 7th seed. The factor that I don't love is there's going to be fans in the stands for these playoff games, and Kyrie just hasn't. He has a history of not wanting to play.
Well, this is a heck of a meme. Yeah.
He had for years had not wanted to play when he was with the Celtics. He had not wanted to play in Cleveland against the Cavs. He had the shoulder injury last year that all the Celtics fans were like, this is why he's. I'm not going to do a Boston accent. This is why he's missing a game.
He's a cop. He's a cop.
He's a cop.
That's what they'd say.
Yeah, that's all I got. But it's a thing, and I'm not trying to make fun of what Kyrie like. Sometimes Kyrie like has the times when he doesn't want to play a game. He just has those moments. I'm not saying he would do that in the playoffs, but I'm not looking forward to the idea of Kyrie in round 1 matching up against the Celtics with these fans who haven't been able to be in the building for a year, allowed back in those vicious animals in Massachusetts.
Sick puppies, all of them. Drinking
all that Cape water.
Yeah. Yes.
Those Nantucket.
And Sam Adams.
Necromancers.
Did Kyrie ever smudge the Cleveland arena? Did he only ever smudge the Boston Garden?
I don't know if we should say smudge. Is that
I think that's what they call
sage? Oh,
no,
is that what they call it? Is that the official term?
I hope it is. I'm pretty sure it's called smudging something. Not I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
And I'm trying to be respectful. I am literally trying to get this right.
Yeah.
So please, if I blew it, don't kill me. But
Yeah.
I think he may have only smudged.
Like, what was Tucker Carlson? What is he saying about white replacement? Isn't that his new thing? That like,
jeez.
Is a thing that is all about like
that's where he's going
white
full
supremacy.
Jeez, good lord.
Yeah.
No, it's good to know.
Dive bomb into that.
But it's just an interesting data point that the only arena that he smudged was because it's top of mind. He thinks that there's a bad energy still inside the Boston Garden. So in that way, although he's cleansed the energy potentially, it could be a lingering doubt in his mind.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
It's like when you do acid. There's always a bit of acid in your body.
Is that true? Is that another thing? You've been listening to a lot of Joe Rogan lately. That's what's happening. There's something going on.
There's a thing that I think it's acid, where if you ever take acid, it like lives in your spine. And it's sometimes when you crack your back, you get a
hit. Yeah.
You get a trip.
You go back.
Trip.
Yeah.
Not like all the time. It's not like every time you crack your back, you're just tripping.
Yeah.
But I think there's a thing about that. That's
okay.
I'm
going to look that up.
I've never done acid, but what a fun idea that you could just be walking.
We should
sit in your car.
We should do. If the Nets win, we'll do acid. If we win a championship, we're gonna go to the parade on acid.
That's a cool fun thing.
We'll
do a live show.
Yeah.
On acid.
Could you imagine you on acid, Mike? That would be a problem. That would not be good.
Yeah. Well, how would you think I would turn out?
Fetal position under a car. I mean, if we're being honest.
All right, well, let's just do one last one because I have to go. I shouldn't say but. And anyways, we can reserve the Bucks 76ers discussion for later because they are certainly a tier above everyone else in the Eastern Conference. It's 76ers, Nets, Bucks, and then everyone else. So the Hawks are the last team. The Hawks are just a team I haven't really thought about all that much this season. But since Nate McMillan took over, they've been amazing.
They've been balling.
And they're 30-25. That's a legit record. Bogdanovich is back.
It's kind of legit. I
mean, it's pretty good. For the Hawks. The Hawks were horrible.
But is it fourth seed legit?
It's pretty good.
Okay.
Bogdanovich is back. They got Lou Williams instead of Rajon Rondo. John Collins is there. They didn't trade him. Trae Young. This team has a lot of talent. It's all young talent. It's all guys who haven't done anything collectively together ever. Clint Capella, of course, the center who was destroyed by Miles Bridges. I'm going to ask you, and we can this become, are you worried or not, instead of pros and cons. Is there any, so let's say the Hawks bumped down, they lost a couple of games, but bumped down to the 7th seed, and that's who the Nets played in the first round. Is there any part of you that's that? To me, that's probably the most talented team.
Yeah.
Of everyone below the Bucks, 76ers. I think that's the most talented team, but it doesn't mean that I'm terrified.
Yeah, I guess my take on it is going to be kind of a bit of a meme take, but I kind of think about arcs of teams, whether they're ascendant or descendant, and so why I'd prefer to play the Celtics over the Hawks is because the Celtics, for me, feel like the beginning of the end of that sort of era, that reign. I think they're going to have to, if they get a second round exit against the Nets, I think it's time for them to really think about their, about mixing up their personnel. I don't know how they're going to do this or what exactly needs to happen, but it seems like it's trending downwards for them for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Whereas the Hawks have the opposite trajectory, and for that reason, it's just I don't need that youthful exuberance on my time. You take that, you give that to the Sixers or the Bucks. We don't need that kind of energy over here. So that's sort of my feeling. Although if they are in the 4th seed, that's the second round matchup we'll probably face. So yeah, it's worth thinking about. We should do some deep dives on the Hawks because I, like you, have just kind of been noting their upward trends without getting too deep. What's going on? Breaking news?
Yeah, LaMarcus Aldridge has retired.
What?
He has an irregular heartbeat.
Oh my lord!
And I have to go, but
okay.
He is retired.
All right, well, have fun talking about that. Jeez, that's a wow.
Wow. Yeah. So he Malika Andrews retweeted something. LaMarcus Aldridge tweeted out like this long letter about. Maybe we'll reconvene and tack something on at the top of this.
Guess we gotta.
We'll talk. All right. This is the Glue Guys.
That's it. You gotta run. Oh, yeah, he's gotta run. Hard out. He's gotta go.
Hard out. But Brian and I will. If you're listening to this now, we will probably have made something at the beginning of our other pod.
Probably. At BK Glue Guys, Mike, you gotta go. We'll see you guys.
Yeah, bye.
Everyone knows. Bye.